Hi, I am Dory Azar, and in the video segment today, I'm going to show you how Vue.js could integrate with Calligraphy. Calligraphy and Vue.js work beautifully with each other. Calligraphy is a PHP model view controller framework, and then Vue.js is one of the latest progressive JavaScript frameworks on the market that deals primarily with the Vue layer, which means it is primarily concerned with building user interfaces in the most structured and the fast possible way. So those two philosophies work really well with each other, which is why Calligraphy decided to integrate Vue.js out of the box with its own framework. What I'm going to show you in the video tutorial today is how we could integrate Vue.js into Calligraphy in two different ways. The first way is about integrating Vue.js as a library, which means there is no need to have any Node.js or any JavaScript dependencies or any JavaScript packages installed on your local machine in order for you to be able to run it. And the second way is a more fully blown, full framework Vue.js that gets integrated into Calligraphy, which of course, if you need to go in that route, you will need to have Node.js and some other packages installed locally on your machine, including the Vue.js or Vue command line interface distribution. Now, there are positives and negatives to doing either of those methods. Including Vue.js as a library can be very helpful for very simple applications that or simple web applications that don't require a lot of page transitioning or going from pages to other pages, and not a lot of redirections. So anything that relies on dynamic content within a single page could easily be done using a simple implementation or a simple integration with between Vue.js and Calligraphy. Okay, so that for that use case number one, which is integrating a Vue.js as a library, could serve the purpose. For a more elaborate and large-scale applications that have a lot of pages and a lot of transitioning among the pages, and each of these pages have a dynamic content within them, then in that case, it would be more appropriate to use full integration of Vue.js into Calligraphy. In the video session today, I am going to show you how to do both. And I'm going to assume that you do not have Calligraphy yet. So we're going to take the installation from the very beginning in order to make it clearer for those of you who don't have Calligraphy, to show them the full journey on how to get started with Vue.js from scratch. Of course, Vue.js using Calligraphy. So in order for me to do this, I'm going to first start by installing the Calligraphy framework, and that is and everything that I'm going to be sharing with you today is all in the documentation of Calligraphy that is on the GitHub of the Calligraphy Quill framework. And inside the Calligraphy Quill, there is a wiki, and that wiki has the exhaustive documentation on everything that you need to know about the Calligraphy framework, including how to install Vue.js. So the two parts that we're concerned with today are the Calligraphy and Vue.js section in the documentation, and it has the two different ways of installing and using Vue.js with Calligraphy. The basic way, which is Vue.js as a library, and then the large-scale application way, which is the more integrated version of Vue and with Calligraphy. And we're going to do or we're going to learn how to install both. Okay, so now let me go back to the primary or the basic installation of Calligraphy itself in order for us to get from a fresh start. And I'm going to use this composer command to do that from my command line. I'm going to go to at least the area where my web server is serving the my web applications in general, and of course in this video I'm not showing how to install a server locally on your machine. We are assuming that you already have a PHP server that is capable of supporting Calligraphy. If you don't know how to do that, I will strongly advise you to read some of the documentation on the Calligraphy GitHub. All right, so now I'm gonna run this, but I do not want Calligraphy quill to be installed in its default folder. Let's create a folder together, call it vue test, just for the purpose of this demo. And now it's gonna start installing the Calligraphy framework along with all its dependencies, and it's gonna get to a prompt that's going to be asking whether or not we would like some of the updates, some of the JavaScript updates within the package to be updated. If you happen to already have Node.js installed on your machine with the npm, then yes, I would tell you to hit the yes over here and then let it update. Okay. If you don't, no worries at all. This could be done at a later time. Okay, so now based on this, we should have a new folder that got created for us called vue test. Indeed, we have it, and if we do a listing of it, we will see everything that we just so the full calligraphy code base directly in vue test. Awesome. So now that we have that, we still need to initialize the framework, and in order to do it, we need to open the command line, or to use the command line interface called Calligrapher that comes out of the box with Calligraphy, and we're gonna call the initialize command, and this is gonna initialize a project for us. I might have mistyped, and yes, indeed, initialize. Okay, all right, and then great. Now we have Calligraphy that is completely initialized on our machine. In order to verify that, it's always good to go to your local host and to go to the Vue test application that we just created. And ideally, if everything is well, it will tell you will get the landing page of the Calligraphy framework that has the typical welcome message along with all the resources that you need to get started with Calligraphy. Okay. So now Calligraphy is installed. I'm going to also go ahead and open in my VS Code a new installation of that we just did that is called Vue Test. So let's open it up to keep an eye on some of the things that we're going to be doing. So let's close all these over here. Okay, and now we have our Vue Test. All right. Now let's go back to our command line and to our documentation, because now we're gonna integrate Vue.js. And like I mentioned, there are two ways of integrating Vue.js. The first way is through the Vue or integrating Vue as a library. And really, everything that you need to be worried about is to actually run a command from Calligrapher to do that for you. Okay, so there is nothing more that needs to be done, because most of this integration is actually happening in the cloud, and it's about importing library from the cloud of Vue.js and any other dependencies that are needed. So what this command is going to be doing is it's going to create the boilerplate structure or the boilerplate code for you in order to get started immediately with Vue. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. All you need to do is give it a name. So let's call it Vue as a library, like that, Vue as a library. Then we're going to run it. And that's it. The project got created in a Vue structure already for us. So now if I go to VS Code, we notice under the public folder, there's a new folder called Vue as a library. And inside of it, you will see two things. You will see a folder called scripts and an index.php, which typically, if you know Vue.js already, those end up being the two main components of a Vue.js application, which is an HTML file along with a JavaScript file behind the scene that would run it. In this particular case, we do not use HTML, we use PHP because Calligraphy is PHP based. And in order to allow for a more seamless integration between Calligraphy and Vue.js, we need to have a PHP extension, because we are also using behind the scenes some libraries in here from Calligraphy. And in order to benefit from the full capabilities of Calligraphy within that page or within this HTML, we need to call it to have some PHP scripts in it, which, as you can see, are already in there for you. But as far as you are concerned, you will deal with this and you will start programming in it just like with any other HTML that you're used to working with, along with, of course, with Vue.js. Now, the script that is behind the scene is the main.js script. That is really where the gist of your Vue application is. So this has a typical structure of a VueJS application that is nothing more but an object that has several attributes or properties to it. One of these attributes is the element, if you remember, the EL, which is really which indicates which ID in the HTML file your Vue code will be injected in, and in this particular case, your Vue app is actually in between this tag and this tag, which is doing nothing right now but outputting a response of something that doesn't even exist. Okay, so just to let you know that your app is here, is in between those two tags. Okay, so it's inside the app element. All right, let's go back. I apologize. Let's go back to the JavaScript file. So our element is actually, or our Vue.js app lives in the in the HTML tag that has an ID app, like we've seen. And then there are some other properties such as the data, which are all the variables that will be contained and known within this app, and all the methods, which are the functions that you want to create within your app. And then you have several states that that could be explicited in the app itself. So one of them is mounted. So basically this is the equivalent of what happens when the application is loaded. So this is technically your main. Okay, so this is where you're going to call the functions that you want to happen within or to happen on load. And there are some other states also that you could control in a Vue.js application. Of course, this video is not going to explain to you how Vue.js works. If you really want to know how Vue.js works, you will I would strongly recommend that you go to the Vue.js website. It has fantastic resources and fantastic educational material to get you started very, very quickly. Now, of course, when you go to learn about Vue.js, you don't necessarily need to go through the quick start or the introduction that tells you how to install it, whether as a library or a fully blown framework, just because Calligraphy is doing all of that for you. However, in terms of understanding the language itself and the syntax of the framework itself, I would strongly encourage you to go through the essentials of the application as well as the components in depth in order to really get a grasp on how to program with Vue.js if you are not familiar with it. Okay, so it's very important to understand the template syntax, the class binding, the conditional rendering, so basically how to do if, for loops, how to do form bindings, so how basically how you can make your variables reactive even in a form, which Vue.js does it way in a great way in comparison to other frameworks on the market today. All right, so let's go back to the documentation. Again, this is not about teaching you how to use Vue.js, but rather how to install and integrate Vue.js within Calligraphy. Now, the last thing that I need to drive your attention to is great. You have your index, you have your application. Let me just write hello world over here, because now what I need to show you is how do we run this, okay, in a model like this one. And the reality is it's done for you out of the box, and Calligraphy has a way to route to this application from the moment you actually created it using the command line. So that command that we've done in here to create the app is already has taken care of how to do the routing to this app. So in order for us to know how this app is routed to, we're going to go to application config, and then we're going to go to the routers and web.php file that is given out of the box with Calligraphy. And notice that there's something called routing to JavaScript's app in this file, and it tells you that anything that is in the path apps along with the path name would take you to your application. So in this particular case, if we do localhost view test, that's the name of our Calligraphy application, and we're going to say app/view as a library, which is really I lost it. Let me go back here. All right, we're going to do app/vue view as a library. We're going to press enter, and you're going to see our hello world that we just did, along with the response from an API that doesn't even exist at this stage. So this is why it's returning an empty array. Okay, so notice that we routed directly to our application, and it immediately took the index file into account. Okay. Now, if you happen to need more than one page in this structure and in this model, what you need to do is you need, let's say, to copy this file, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to say, let's create another one actually within the view as a library. Okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call it temp.php. Okay, and I'm going to copy everything that is in index.php to temp.php. This is as if I'm creating a completely new app within. Okay, and I wanted to use the same JavaScript file. Okay, in order for me to want it to do that, notice in the .php at the very end, it tells you which view you want to load. And in this particular case, we're saying we wanted to load main. If you want to create another view script, then you would either append it or completely change or replace the main with this new name that you want. Okay, that's how you would make it map to another view JavaScript logic. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change hello world, and I'm going to say this is coming from temp. Great, from temp. Now, how can we make sure though that when we're running this, because now if I keep running this, there's no notion of temp whatsoever. So, and we are still in the view as a library app, so I didn't change anything. So how can I make sure that I run the temp and not the index file? And in order to do that, Caligraphy gives you a way to append your URL with an app and then say, in this particular case, that it's going to be called temp. And now we should be running temp as opposed to running the index file. Okay, so this gives you a way to create multiple different pages if you need to, as part of this simple way of including the library. Great. So that was, and all of this was our first way of doing things. Now let's get a little more sophisticated, and let's learn how we could do it if you want to include the entire integration of Vue into Caligraphy. We're going to go into the second section that is mainly about large applications. Now, we do need there are some requirements before we are able to use this. Of course, Caligraphy, we have that. You need to install the Vue command line interface, which is really that I would tell you it's the entire framework packaged in a way for you to use and to unpack locally. Okay, so you need to have that, and it is recommended that you install it. But you cannot install it unless you have Node.js on your local machine. So please make sure that Node.js is installed globally in your local machine and that you have the npm package with it. Okay, the best way to get Node.js is to go or to get it from the installer. So you have the links in the documentation itself. I will open it in a new window. But this, for example, Node.js.org, if you get the installers, whether you have a Windows, a Mac, or any other operating system, get the installer that is appropriate for you. Okay, you can either choose to get the latest version, or you can choose to get the latest LTS, which is really the one that is tested the most. So it would be up to you to use either one of those. If you want the very, very most recent one, I would strongly encourage you to go for the for the ones that haven't been tested yet. If you want to explore and experiment, but if you want the safest version, go with the latest distribution that is recommended. Okay. So that's how you get Node.js. Once you have Node.js, you get the view, then you're ready to go. Okay? For some reason, if you have not initialized yet your Caligraphy, you do need to initialize it before you do anything else. Okay? But we have done this already, so there's no need for us to do any of it yet. Great. So now what do we need to do? We need to actually, again, use Calligrapher, but this time we're going to do something else with it. We're going to say Calligrapher and we're going to say create, and we're going to say what the name of our project is, and this one is Vue as a framework. Here we go, and let's create it. And you will notice that it's going to start installing all the packages that you need in order to get you started. So let's give it a little bit of time. This might take a couple of minutes here and there. Okay. Notice that not only it will install the packages, it will also at some point get all the necessary dependencies for you. Okay, it looks like it's done. So now it tells us VueJS project successfully created. You first need to go to the project folder, so that because we're not in it yet, and then you need to run the local server. So notice here that despite the fact that we are in a Caligraphy distribution, and Caligraphy is a server side application out of the box with its PHP resources, when Vue is being run, it will run its own local server that would take us directly to the Vue. Okay, and that is key in understanding how the integration works. And there is a big part of the documentation that speaks about this. And the reason for it is that a local server is going to go serve the HTML/JavaScript pages first, and then if that you have any data model or any database that you created with Caligraphy PHP, you would actually interact with it using APIs and using REST APIs and using the ability of Caligraphy to give you the APIs out of the box. So that's how the connection between the two happens, despite the fact that they're both in the same structure. So let's go ahead and run the local server. So I'm going to first go to Vue as a framework, just like it's suggested. And in order to run as a server, we're going to do npm run serve. And let's see what this one gives us. Now, ideally, if all goes well, it's going to generate a URL for us to use. And that URL, which in this particular case is going to end up being localhost at the 8080 port. So let's go there. And here we go. It is run, and notice that it's giving you some resources material, primarily about about VueJS in here, along with any documents and cookbooks that are necessary for you to learn more about how to do things. Okay, now that page resembles very well what Caligraphy gives out of the box, except that this time this page is actually built using VueJS within Caligraphy. So let's go to our VS Code and see what happened in there. Okay, so we're going to go to public because that's really where our application ended up being created, and it's Vue as a framework. Great, and notice all these packages in there. You will notice a bunch of things. Some of it you will understand, some of it you won't, but you don't have to worry because the documentation, whether it's on the Caligraphy side or on the VueJS side, explains this for you pretty well. What you need to know though is that you have one main folder or two main folder that you really need to be acting on significantly. There is a source folder, and then there is a public folder. Public folder is where your HTML ends up being. Okay, so that HTML file is what is running the application. You don't need to do anything with it. Okay, this is not where you will be building your pages. That HTML is the basic structure of your application, but moving forward, you no longer need to create any HTML in here, okay? Most of it is going to be done through componentry on top of this HTML file. So basically your public, you can forget about it, okay? The one that you need to care about the most is the source folder. In the source folder, Caligraphy comes with an opinion on how it's structured for you. And the way Caligraphy deals with it all, it considers everything a component. So a page is a component, and even some element or a form element is a component. So components, they vary. They could be something as small as a drop down or a radio button, or it could be something as big as an entire page. And they are compounded within each other. They are like Lego pieces that get built on top of each other. Okay. So let's go and take a look a little bit at what the main.js is. Main.js, if you remember, is really where the startup of the application or the start logic of the application is. And you will notice that there's a bunch of stuff happening in here that is trying to import all the dependencies that you need for your application. Probably the piece that matters to us the most in here is if you want to change anything about the API keys, even though you don't need to, but if you do, you might, and if you change the .m file in here, you might need to go back to this main.js and change some of the properties that are used in here. The other big piece of this area is if you want to define an API route for your logic. So if you want to define how the connection is happening with the Caligraphy APIs, and there is like a basic API route that you want to use, we suggest that maybe you want to put it in the config of your application. Okay. And that's it. That's all. The other important piece in here are the routes, and probably this is one of the main reasons why you might go in here. It is primarily to create your page routes this time around. Notice that we're talking about page routes at this stage. We are no longer talking about the server data routes. Those routes are not the same as the ones that are in the web.php file. The ones that are in the web.php files are running on the server side, and primarily with the integration they will be used as data routes, as API routes, as endpoints. Whereas if you are using Vue as a framework, most of the routes that you're going to be creating in here are going to be page routes that are mainly UI driven and that all are actual components. So in this particular case, it is telling us that from the moment I go to my root over here, I am going to redirect to a component called the home page, and which we're going to give it a name. We're going to call it home. So there is a component called home page in here. So let's go check that out. Over here and in our structure, we see two folders. We see a components folder and a common folder, and then there is an app.vue folder. We'll get back to components and common in a while. Let's go take a look at app.vue file structure. The app.vue file structure is really where the app is, the skeleton of the app is. Okay, so this is where, and it is a component in itself. All right, so in this skeleton of the app, it's telling it that it needs to go pick up the routes from our file main.js. So this is the piece that is responsible, and it is the skeleton. It is responsible for displaying in the wrapper what page or what component of the page is in here. Remember that in a Vue.js, it's a single page application. So everything is happening in one page. And in that one page, there is a navigation component, which is defined in here. And we'll go see it in a while, because over here we call it, but in fact, its rendering is defined in the component itself. Over here, we're just calling it, we're invoking it, and we're telling the app that it needs to get a navigation from this componentry, and it's getting a router view. The router view is what is going to change the content in here. So let me go back to the page and look at the structure. This is the navigation, and everything that is under here is actually getting delivered through the router, which in this case it's delivering the home component. So the home component is welcome calligraphy, and everything in here and everything that we see here on top is the navigation. And that is exactly what this app structure is telling us. Now let's go look at the two components that are coming to us out of the box. And you will notice components is already structured for you as part of the distribution. There are things like what we call global components, and there are things like pages component. Now home that we're using the router is actually a page component. So let's go take a look at home itself. Notice how it's structured. And by the way, this is a typical way of structuring components in Vue.js. You can find this in the Vue.js documentation. There is always a template. There is always a script, meaning a JavaScript, and there could be a style tag. Every component is structured the same way. It doesn't matter whether it's a page or a small component, it always has a template, script, and potentially styles, which in this one, it doesn't have it. In the script, if you look at the code of it, it is a Vue.js structure. Okay, so we will see the same components again that we've seen before, or the same properties again. So we see the data, we see the methods, we see the mounted and computed and watch are other properties, state properties of the Vue.js typical application. Okay, and in this particular one, not only we have the script, but we also have a template, and that template is typically in HTML. So that's what the HTML of this component looks like. Okay, so it says welcome to Caligraphy, and then we have a loop that goes through something that we call cards. So there must be cards somewhere, and it shows a new component in here called the show card, which is also defined in the script itself. All right, so our page is actually using two components. It's using a show message component, and then it's using a general or a show card component. And those two are defined in the global components. Notice we have a show message, we have a show general, and if you remember from before, the page was using a navigation, there is a show navigation component. And all of those componentry, they're all structured the same way: template, script, and potentially a style. Okay, none of them have a style of their own because they all inherit the style of what comes in app.vue, but or in the main.js. Main.js is actually taking a style for all of those, so it doesn't need to be done locally anymore. But if you want, for whatever reason, to override the style, then you would add a style component in here that is very particular to each and every component. So these are your components, and your components are used within pages, which is another component of its own. So this gives you an outstanding way of actually combining both Vue.js and Caligraphy. Okay, now Caligraphy and Vue.js, they happen to work in a way where the Caligraphy needs to the Vue.js piece, whether it's a page or what have you, will talk back to any data model that is created within the Caligraphy framework itself through REST APIs, okay, so through requests. So any component in here can actually send requests to the application folder or to the URL that is created by these, or to the routes that are created in here in order to get certain data or in order to act on the database itself. Okay. And that should do it. There are some other common pieces in here. You don't necessarily need to touch any of those. The documentation of Caligraphy describes pretty well how things are done. So I will strongly advise you to start getting a grasp of how to use all these pieces together. With that, I hope this was useful to you. Enjoy using Vue with Caligraphy, and see you in the next tutorials. Thank you.